It happened in silence. In the golden haze of a London afternoon, while tourists laughed and phones flickered, a little girl, no older than 7, stood frozen in place. One hand clenched near her mouth, her eyes wide, trembling. She said nothing. She didn't cry. But a British royal guard, motionless in full ceremonial red, saw something no one else did. A signal. A gesture so small, most would dismiss it as fidgeting. Yet he lowered his gaze. And in that stillness, something cracked. Children don't usually stand still in places like this. They chase pigeons, tug their parents' sleeves, laugh in bursts too loud for the guards to ignore. But this girl, she didn't move. Not when the music swelled. Not when the crowd surged. Her body remained locked, eyes unfocused, breath short. Only her hand moved, gently, rhythmically, toward her face. Not waving, not scratching, just signaling. Or was it? The man beside her, sharply dressed in a navy suit, leaned down and whispered something. He smiled, but her expression didn't change. He placed a hand on her shoulder, firm, not affectionate. Just shy. He muttered when a tourist nearby glanced curiously, but her sleeves were pulled too low for a warm day. And where the cuff slipped, beneath the fabric, a faint bruise, purple edging into green. The girl didn't make eye contact with anyone, except the guard. For one split second, their eyes locked. He blinked, then turned back to his post. He wasn't supposed to move, not even flinch. But something about that look lingered, like a forgotten tune trying to find its way back. In the shadows of tradition, a question had been asked, not with words, but with silence and a fist held close. Sergeant William Barrett had stood in that uniform for years. He'd memorized every ceremonial command, every step, every silence required. People called him stoic, but the truth was simpler. He had learnt to stand still, because movement used to cost lives. Before the palace, before the medals, before the stillness, he had served in Kandahar, a field medic. He'd seen wounds the cameras never captured, children with no names, mothers with no graves. But one girl haunted him more than the rest. Her face wasn't clear anymore. Memory had softened the details, but he remembered her hand, small, brown-skinned, raised toward him through the shattered wall of a school. He remembered the order, evac now. He remembered not moving. He remembered the gunfire starting anyway. He never knew if she lived. Back home, he buried the moment under protocol, ceremony, stillness, until today. That little girl in gray, that clenched hand, not identical, but close enough. He told himself it was nothing, that he was projecting, that London wasn't Kabul, that ceremonial guards don't intervene. But memory doesn't follow rules. It seeps. And for the first time in years, William Barrett found his pulse outpacing the drumbeat. The crowd shifted again, a tide of phones, chatter, and drifting attention. But William didn't see tourists anymore. He saw variables, positions, lines of sight. The man beside the girl adjusted his cuff, then subtly stepped between her and a nearby camera. Too smooth, too practiced. The girl flinched at the movement, not visibly, but just enough for someone who knew trauma to recognize it. She tightened her grip on the strap of her backpack. Her knuckles whitened. Barrett's eyes scanned the man. Tailored navy suit, polished shoes, no wedding ring. The way he leaned in, not protective, but possessive, like he owned the space around her, owned her silence. Then there was the voice, software calculated. He bent low and said something again, and for a second, the girl's body locked, like she was bracing. Not for a slap, no, for a memory. That's when it happened. She moved her hand again, not randomly, but in a shape, thumb tucked, fingers folded. The same signal, help. The guard's breath hitched. Tourists kept walking. Guards kept standing. Tradition kept pulsing. Only he had seen it, and once seen, it could not be unseen. He heard someone call out, casually, "Sophie, come here!" A woman's voice, from behind the line of spectators. The girl didn't react, not even a flicker. The man in the suit looked over his shoulder, smiled faintly, then tightened his grip on her shoulder. Just a fraction. Just enough for the girl to wince. William's eyes dropped to her bag. Pink. A child's drawing stitched on the back. But the name tag was turned inward. Hidden. Another detail. The woman stepped closer, frowning. "She has the same backpack as my daughter," she said, almost to herself. A pause. Then, more urgently, "That is my daughter's bag." The man spoke. Too calm, too rehearsed. "Ah, we picked this up at a lost and found just yesterday. Coincidence." But the girl, she didn't look at the woman, didn't look at anyone. Her hand moved again, slower this time, more deliberate. Barrett knew the signs of coaching, of fear wrapped in obedience. He saw children in war zones obey their captors more loyally than their rescuers. Not because they trusted them, but because they had to. She was too quiet, too still, too trained. The uniform said, "Don't react." But the man inside it was already breaking. The line of tourists thickened, blocking William's view for a moment. When it cleared, the girl and the man were gone. He scanned left. Nothing. Right. Just the blurred tide of faces and feet. Then, there. Across the courtyard, the man was pulling her by the wrist now, not guiding, dragging. The girl looked back once, only once, and did it again. That signal, this time slower, this time in full, thumb tucked into palm, fingers closed over. "Help me." No hesitation, no ambiguity, a language made of survival. William's jaw locked. He couldn't move, not yet. Not unless it became physical. Not unless there was a threat. That was the rule, centuries old, unbroken. But so was his promise. To himself. To the girl in Kabul who never got to finish the gesture. The man looked back. Their eyes met. Soldier and suspect. Neither blinked. William stepped forward, half a pace. A nearby officer cleared his throat. Protocol reminder. William returned to position. But his shadow leaned forward, longer than the rest. The girl disappeared behind a column. Gone from sight, but not from knowing. And knowing is where duty ends and responsibility begins. It wasn't loud. There was no scream, no sudden crash or cry. Just the metallic scrape of a belt buckle, a girl's sharp intake of breath, and a decision. William moved. He broke the line. The symmetry, the silence. His boots echoed once, twice, then pounded across the courtyard like thunder against marble. The crowd gasped, not knowing whether to cheer or record. Some did both. The man in the suit turned, startled. Too late. Barrett's shoulders struck him mid-pull, sending both sprawling. The girl stumbled back, eyes wide, but not with fear this time. He shielded her without words. Just one hand held out between her and the man. The other, slowly raised to his own chest. The man lunged again, a flash of metal. William didn't block. He took the blade to his shoulder, twisted, disarmed, and ended it in 3 brutal, quiet movements. Red soaked into red. Ceremonial coat turned crimson. Still, no anger. Still, no words. The girl whispered finally, "Lily." Not Sophie. Not lost. Not voiceless anymore. William looked at her, and this time, when she raised her hand, he didn't just see the signal. He saw the child who made it. And this time, he answered. It wasn't the blood that shook him, nor the man sprawled on the ground, not even the girl clinging to his coat, breath staccato. It was the smell. Sun-warmed stone, burnt metal, fear. It was the memory of a school in Kandahar, a broken wall, a girl with no shoes, eyes sunken from weeks of hiding, and that same gesture. She'd made it just once, not to him, to someone else. But William had seen it, seconds before the extraction order came through, seconds before he turned away. "Not your problem," the sergeant had said. "She's not in the plan." He'd swallowed it then, buried it beneath years of medals and silence, and told himself that following orders was what made a soldier. But standing here now, with red staining his gloves, with Lily pressed against him, with the world filming, whispering, questioning, he felt the weight of that moment return. Only this time, he hadn't turned away. He hadn't obeyed the script. He'd broken it. Because some debts don't expire, and some ghosts don't leave until they see you try again. The courtyard was quiet now. No music, no movement, just wind brushing the edges of uniforms and petals dropped by passing tourists. William knelt, his back straight, boots planted, face bleeding, but steady, not because of pride, but because she needed someone who didn't shake. Lily stood in front of him, small hands wrapped around his sleeve. She looked up, eyes no longer wild with fear, but raw with something older. He didn't ask her name again. She had already given it. And names, he knew, weren't what saved people. Recognition did. She reached into her coat and pulled out something crumpled. A folded note, pressed deep into her sock. Shaking, she handed it to him. He opened it with bloodied fingers, scrawled in pencil, barely legible. "If someone finds me, please don't let him talk first. He lies better than I do." Barrett exhaled, once, sharp, a line between lungs and memory. And then Lily whispered, soft, almost embarrassed, "Was I brave?" He looked at her. Not like a soldier, not like a hero, but like a father who had almost lost his second chance. "Yes," he said. "You were braver than everyone else here." And no one watching could argue. The ceremony did not resume. There was no trumpet to reclaim order, no polished voice to narrate what had just unfolded. Instead, men in suits approached, slowly, deliberately. They didn't run, they didn't shout. They simply stepped into the silence, carrying the weight of protocol. William didn't resist. He stood up, nodded once to Lily, and let them take his arms. Not in force, but in form. A different kind of uniform now surrounded him. No rifles, just rules. The cameras turned. The crowd parted. No one clapped. No one booed. A few whispered. A few lowered their phones. And one little girl refused to let go of his sleeve. But he let go for her. Not with words. Just a small nod. His way of saying, "It's safe now." They asked him no questions. He offered no defense. Because this wasn't about courtroom victories, or headlines, or redemption. It was about choice. And the line he had crossed, not out of disobedience, but out of something quieter. Something older. Something we used to call conscience. A week later, William Barrett's name was mentioned in Parliament. Not with scorn, not with celebration, but with something rarer. Pause. No charges were filed. No medals were issued. Just a quiet letter from the palace, acknowledging a breach of protocol and an act of humanity. The footage circulated, blurred, replayed, dissected. Some argued he was reckless. Others said he was right. But Lily's voice never entered the noise, nor did William's. He returned to service, not as a guard, but as a field instructor for recognizing trauma signals in public spaces. His new uniform had no gold, just purpose. One morning, weeks later, a small envelope arrived at the barracks. No stamp, no sender. Inside, a crayon drawing, a stick figure in red, a little girl holding his hand, and above them, written in shaky, careful letters, "Thank you for seeing me." That was all. No documentary could explain what that moment cost. No regulation could capture what it restored. Because sometimes, the most dangerous silence is the one we justify in the name of order. And sometimes, the kindest thing a soldier can do is break it. So ask yourself, if it were you, if you had seen her hand, would you have stood still or stepped forward? In a world increasingly shaped by noise, urgency, and appearances, this story reminds us of the profound power of quiet moral clarity. Sergeant William Barrett didn't act to be seen. He didn't speak to explain himself. He broke a centuries-old tradition, not out of rebellion, but out of recognition, of a silent signal, a child's plea, and a memory he refused to let repeat. The lesson is not about heroism in the grand sense, but about the cost of not acting when we see something that unsettles the soul. In our own lives, we are often witnesses to quiet suffering. A neighbor who withdraws, a child who grows suddenly silent, a stranger whose eyes carry fear. The temptation is always to look away, to tell ourselves, it's not our place. But conscience doesn't come with permission slips. Sometimes, doing what is right means stepping out of formation, even when it's uncomfortable, even when it's misunderstood. Especially then, for older generations who've seen how easily silence can protect the wrong things, this story is a call to remain watchful, compassionate, and brave, not in loud declarations, but in small, decisive moments when the world most needs us to notice.